Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the world's okayest physical therapist podcast, hosted by me, Dr. H. Today, we are finishing off the series with a finale of Is Physical Therapy Unprofessional Now? And this is going to be the call to action portion. But first, please don't forget to check out the description below for the Patreon for the 15% off on the 10,000 shorts, t-shirts, and pants. And please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this with everybody you know, as everyone should probably be informed about what's going on and how this change could potentially impact them. This change, of course, being the Board of Education's change and not recognizing physical therapy as a professional degree anymore. So today we are not going to talk about the history or the degrees or the licensing boards or anything like that. We're going to be talking about strategy because right now, physical therapists, physical therapy assistants, and patients are losing access in rural and urban areas due to the 2022 Medicare cuts, as well as the likelihood of this unprofessionalism going through and stripping PT of the extra $30,000 a year in student loan funds. So we're not going to bemoan this. I'm not going to sit around and just talk and complain the whole time. This is going to be the episode where it's a call to action, where we can't sit around waiting for someone else to fix it. And we're going to talk about exactly what to do next without relying on organizations that have failed to protect the profession for over 20 years and lost the majority of the lobbying wars they've gotten into. What I want you to take away from this is that if we do nothing, physical therapy will become harder to access, harder to practice, and in many areas, it will likely disappear. Not because people don't need physical therapy, but because policy didn't protect the patient's right to access. So it's already happening in rural and urban areas. Well, in rural areas, clinics are closing or downsizing, wait times are increasing, patients are having to travel increased distances to see a physical therapist, usually on the order of 50 minutes or more. PT reimbursements cuts are hitting these rural clinics the most, where they're having to lay off PTAs. And in rural areas, this can often lead to clinics closing, and there might not be another one for 30 minutes in either direction. And to highlight this real quickly, two short examples rather. For example, on the VA side of things, the Veterans Affairs side of things, a lot of veterans, in order to be seen by a physical therapist, will have to drive multiple hours to a centralized location to be seen and evaluated by a physical therapist, to then be sent the multiple hours back to their home, where in their local clinic area, they'll hopefully be seen by a physical therapy assistant. Now, in order for them to be seen, they had to schedule months in advance and then hope that they were able to make the drive if there was no inclement weather, if they didn't have any health issues pop up, or they didn't have any other conflicting schedules. They would then wait the months to show up, be evaluated after driving 2 or 3 hours, to then drive the 2 or 3 hours back home, and then hopefully be seen by a physical therapy assistant locally at the VA center within a few weeks or two. That's the model that will likely be proposed if this keeps going, because the government gets to still say, well, you're still getting care. You are still being seen. Yes, it takes months, but eventually you will be seen and treated. What this is also going to do, it's going to cause triage issues, right? So if you have someone that's coming out of surgery from a rotator cuff repair, knee replacement, hip replacement, they're going to get priority, which means if you recently rolled your ankle, or you think that you strained a muscle, or whatever, it's going to take a lot longer for you to get in, because you're not going to be considered priority, because clinics are going to have to adjust to recent post-surgical care to likely be their most important focus, while they're also downsizing, while wait times are increasing, while they have reduced staff. And in the urban side of things, there's already massive wait lists because, well, it's hard to open a clinic in an office in the city. There's higher rents to be paid for office space. It's harder for even more established firms that have been there for a while specific clinical chains to open a new site because it's so expensive. It's also difficult because of parking. It's hard for patients to get access to parking if they drive their own car, and if they are using public transportation, that can be delayed. They can have issues getting from point A to point B, especially if there's a traffic jam or if there's an accident, so on and so forth. All of this, in addition to skilled nursing facilities having to cut hours just to meet revenue benchmarks, because they're often more a little bit more urban than rural, is going to continue to deprive the elderly of care. And that's kind of already happening. And of course, in both of these settings, you're going to have the increased delegation to techs and unlicensed staff because, of course, they can save $20 an hour by having a tech instead of a PTA. And the big driver of all this, of course, is economics as well. A lot of the newer PT grads are not going to be attracted to more rural settings. They're going to go to urban settings where they can make more money, because when you are graduating PT school and you hear that in New York City or Los Angeles, they're offering to pay you $130,000 a year to do PT, that's going to seem like a whole lot of money, especially when another offer might come in from rural Iowa where they only can pay you $68,000 a year. So quick math tells you that making 2 times that amount somewhere else is probably a better call. The only issue is the higher cost of living in those other states like New York and California is likely going to eat into your money. But when you have $250,000 in student loan debt, you can see where the common sense for the PT student is going to kick in, and they're going to choose the more urban areas, because they're going to try and pay off that PT loan as fast as possible. But again, that leaves the rural areas in a greater deficit, because in most of these rural areas, you actually have PTs that are in the middle of their career or towards the end of their career getting ready to retire, and it's going to be harder to attract those newer PTs in anyway, which will just further increase the issue. So whether you live in a big city or a farm town, patients are already losing access, and no one in power is going to sound the alarm, not until it's politically expedient for them to do so. And that will be probably whichever party is not in power and wants to make a fuss to the party in power, because that's how it works, right? The party in power never seems to have answers to solve the problems. Anyway, what has to happen nationally? Well, there's 3 things that need to happen nationally. In order to move healthcare legislation, because I know last time I was talking about how Congress doesn't seem to do anything when they cut the funds to the PTA because they didn't care about the data. But the truth is that the federal government does care about data. The first thing you can do is present to them cost-saving data. It's the sort of data they really like, because if you can explain to them that they can save money to spend somewhere else, they're much more likely to listen. To use the Army as a quick example, when I was in the Army, we went from the traditional retirement, which is where the Army would pay you a certain amount of money for the rest of your life after you had served 20 years and retired at a specific grade, which would be a specific rank, to a more 401k style retirement, where they promised to meet a certain percentage of your paycheck if you they would price match. So if you said, hey, I'm going to put in 5%, they would also put in 5% up to a certain amount per year. So that way you could technically get out of the Army way earlier with a significantly large 401k. The reason why this is cost saving is because instead of having to pay someone $100,000 for the rest of their life once they retire at 45, you're instead paying maybe a few $1,000s to price match somebody per month. Makes a lot more sense to do that in the beginning. And just not have to worry about paying someone a ridiculous amount of money once they've retired. In fact, if you look at the Army's budget issues, they would tell you straight up their biggest issue is that they were having to pay retirement funds for people that were out. They weren't even having to pay as much money for things that were going on for active duty. The current duty salary wasn't nearly as big of an issue as the retirees getting their pay. So if you can paint the picture in that sense to the federal government, they have demonstrated the ability to really pay attention and to say, yes, we like to save money over here so we can spend it over there, so let's try and save money. So how does that translate into PT? PT has to show up and make the argument that they are saving the government money if they get access to patients. There's a lot of good evidence out there for this already. where as a PT, you can argue that if you get to screen someone who's recently injured, you can determine um, if they likely need imaging or not, and thus save the system from being backlogged and save uh, the government money. Because if they're coming in on medical insurance that is from the government, whether that be TRICARE, Medicaid, Medicare, if you can save the government money, they're going to be interested. And if you say, hey, let me screen this person first because they might not need to go and get an ultrasound, MRI, X-ray, or whatever, it might just be that they sprained their pinky, you can make the argument to the government that you'll be saving them money. The same also goes true with like fall prevention. Hey, let me treat this patient because if we keep them from falling, that means that's one less hip that's fractured, which means less time in the hospital, less time taking up hospital beds, less amount of fluids and care that this person is going to require. If I can get my hands on the patient while they're just a fall risk and turn them into not a fall risk by strengthening them and improving their balance, doesn't that just make more sense? That's one less patient you don't have to worry about possibly taking up a a hospital bed, and eventually possibly needing surgery, which will cost thousands and thousands of dollars, which saves the government money from having to pay that. The second thing that you can do is you can articulate about regulations. And the way that you can do this is by arguing, hey, we need more common sense regulation. We need more clear guidance on what's skilled versus unskilled care. We need regulation on uncertified techs and stuff, because if every physical therapy clinic right now is being incentivized to go run and hire PT techs, which will destroy the PTA profession, maybe you should get ahead of that and say, hey, well, if you think you're going to sneak away and hire or hire PT techs to replace all of your PTAs, we're only going to reimburse you 50% for that. More common sense regulation, more common sense guidance and intent on what they're trying to establish instead of just penalizing the profession, and then also reducing excessive regulation on the clinics. I'm a huge advocate on not trying to get the government to spend more money to, quote, help the problem. Because as I've said before, every single time the government shows up with a fistful of dollars promising to make the problem worse, suddenly everybody raises their costs to exactly how much money the government's holding in that fist. When the government shows up and says, hey, we're going to give you $50,000 a year for your professionalism loan, guess what? Universities will raise the cost to exactly that to meet exactly how much money the government is shelling out. If the government gave $60,000, suddenly it would go up to $60,000. I do not trust companies and I do not trust organizations to be responsible with this. I don't think anybody should. So more money to solve problems is never going to be the answer. Instead, less restrictive regulation, more common sense regulation, and then giving clear guidance and intent is always going to solve the problem much more effectively, because it allows for decentralized control down to the lowest level to make the most common sense decisions in order to have the greatest common impact for the patient. And finally, public narrative. The thing that really seems to win people over is, do you really want to deprive patients of their care? And that's where things really kick off, right? Like I said earlier, if you hit any sort of lawmaker with a, do you really want to deprive grandma of her health insurance? They tend not to like that question and they tend to react accordingly. Now, the potential um, coalition that could be built to help get this information and to affect this, to get this data, to get the idea of what regulations should be cut or should be clarified, or how to get the public narrative out there. The people that you would want to take a look at would be the policy research institutes, oral health advocacy organizations, local business coalitions, patient advocacy groups, and journalism and media. Um, those are going to be your best friends when it comes to going and asking for this information or sharing this information to get it into the appropriate and pertinent spaces to influence lawmakers. So that ties directly into, what can individual clinicians do? Well, you can start by calling, right? You can call your local lawmaker for 10 to 15 minutes and say, here is one story from one patient who has this issue that was directly affected by your vote on this. right? And you're not trying to be mean, you're not trying to be rude, you're not trying to stick it to the man, but you are just saying, hey, I just want you to know here's some of the impact that you're having. It's not good. And I'm not going to try and be a jerk about it, but you are hurting Tiny Tim over here. You know, for a good Christmas time reference because we're near Christmas right now. You are the one that's hurting Tiny Tim by your vote. I know it made sense to you doing what you're doing at the time, but now you're directly impacting my patients and the people around me who need good care. Two, you can organize what I said earlier, some sort of coalition. But here's the difference: the coalition that you can build should be multi professional. It should include people like skilled nursing facility directors, outpatient clinic owners, home health agencies, rural hospital CEOs, things like that. Anybody and everybody you can build a coalition with, because it's going to look a lot more compelling when it comes to a lawmaker when these business owners and these multiple healthcare professions are unified in purpose saying this is not good, which I'll touch on here in a second more. Step 3, you can always talk to independent media or share your stories on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Rumble, start a podcast, possibly dedicate 6 episodes to what you should do about it, cough, cough, things like that. And finally, you can document everything in terms of the number of patients that you've now lost contact with or you've been able to sign up, the wait times, travel distances for patients, and closures or layoffs. And all these are things you can report to the lawmakers, to other fact-finding organizations or data-finding organizations, and to journalists or independent media, and or share on your social media yourself. And that leads us to where to donate to. And I wrote here in large block letters, not the APTA, because like I said last episode, people don't want to back losers. They don't want to volunteer for losing organizations. They don't want to get paid dues to losing organizations. It doesn't make any sense. So I'm not going to advocate for it either. So here are people, organizations that you can look at. An emphasis on look at. I have not personally vetted these. I just did a simple Google cursory search. And these were some of the first ones that came up, so you can check them out too. And it's just worth knowing, right? There are other organizations you can look at. Number 1, the National Rural Health Association. 2, Families USA. 3, Coalition to Protect America's Healthcare. 4, Rand Healthcare Research. 5, Kaiser Family Foundation, Health Policy Division. Why do these matter? Because they produce evidence used in lawmaking. They influence bipartisan committees, and they help defend patient access, not professional prestige. And right here, I wish I could throw the gauntlet down. When a lawmaker sees a letter come across his or her desk that says, this is the National Rural Health Association messaging you about your constituents that you are depriving of care, you can't tell me that's not going to have a heck of a lot more of weight dropping on that person's desk than, oh, sir or ma'am. Real quickly, as your staffer, I just wanted to let you know that the chiropractic lobby is in here to see you 15 minutes before the PT lobby is in to see you, and they're both fighting right now about some bill or some stipulation where the chiropractors want to make sure they're still considered professional and they're willing to drop this amount of money down on your campaign next election cycle. But the PTs are coming in and they're saying, well, they want to make sure they're considered professional, but they're not bringing as much money to the table this time, sir. So I don't know. It's one or the other in the writing of the law that we have to cut money somewhere. So let's just bring them both in and we can see what they say. That is one situation versus, sir, the National Rural Health Association has reached out and told you that your last vote on House Bill whatever deprived several hundred of your constituents, the geriatric population, the population that turn out and vote in pretty good numbers sometimes. Yeah, you deprived them of their ability to get health care and their fall risk significantly increased. So the National Rural Health Association would like you to know that you've now put several hundred of your people at risk for falling, significantly increasing the amount of costs to the healthcare system in your local area, and possibly leading to several inundations because now some patients' health is at risk because they can't even get into the hospitals because they're inundated. Yeah, which one do you think they're going to pay attention to? All right, I made my point. I'm going to move on. Messaging shift. Kind of like I was saying, the messaging needs to stop being about support physical therapy and it has to start becoming about support the freaking patient. It's that easy, right? So it's like instead of it being about professional prestige of well, physical therapy deserves to be defended from these hooligans of the other associations. No, it's the patient that deserves to be defended. It's the patient that deserves to have the best access. It's the patient who deserves the best care. It's that simple. PT is just a tool that helps to get the patient the best outcomes. And we're really good at what we do. We want them to have access to us if they want it, because they deserve it. And so you can start using phrases like preventable disability, home safety, community health, aging in place, veterans access, fall risk reduction, stroke recovery. Because when you start using terms like that with a lawmaker and or independent media, where it's like, oh, I didn't realize that, you know, House member so and so or Congressman or Congresswoman so and so, when they were voting for bill whatever, wanted to, deprive funding for preventable disability access. Whoa, that doesn't sound good. Or yeah, by voting against this bill, so and so has really taken a vote against community health because, as we all know, as these clinics close, community health drops off significantly. We can see that in the number of falls that happen as these clinics close. The number of falls and hip fractures and stuff significantly increases in these rural communities. Things like that, right? Things that just make sense. And you're not doing it to be manipulative, you're just doing it to be factual that, hey, if this happens, this is also likely to happen. We know it's likely to happen because here's the data. So, with all of that in mind, I almost made it the whole time through without a tangent. I'm sorry, guys, or without a rant. I want to thank you all for coming with me on this journey, sincerely. Thank you for listening to this multiple part series, these multiple episodes, because I really do care about the patient. I really do care about you guys getting the best care that you can. Of course, I care about my profession. But we can't wait anymore for the APTA or any other organization to step up and fix this. They're the ones that made the mess in the beginning, and they failed to fix the problem this entire time. And if we keep going on this track and they keep failing, which, I would love for them to get a win in, clinics are going to close, and it's the patients, it's you and I that are going to suffer. So don't be a sucker for the donate to this organization thing that shows up. Do your own research, figure out where your money can go the furthest if you're a physical therapist looking for organizations. I wish I could start a pack on my own. I really wish I had that time to just do that and be like, you know what, I'm going to create something right now. We can all join. We're going to do something. I don't have the skills or knowledge. Maybe one day I will. But for now, we have to put our energy into researching, coalition building, rural and urban advocacy, and then being the citizen journalist in that sense, being the guy or the gal who goes on the social media and puts their voice to the megaphone and says, hey, this isn't right. This doesn't make any sense. This isn't going to help anybody get better. Because if physical therapy is going to survive, it's going to be because of individuals like you and I that took action, not because somebody in some boardroom woke up. Patient access to physical therapy should not be about professional privilege. It should not be about the profession itself. It should be about you, the patient, getting access to what you need and what you deserve. So, thank you so much for listening. Again, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with everybody you know. Everybody stay healthy, stay fit, and stay awesome. And I will catch you guys all in the next episode.